I figured that because I actually was waiting for a while to speak with you because when I became aware of your show and started getting into it, especially prior to us speaking for the first time when we were met face to face,
Yeah.
there was a few things that I was trying to like figure out like what could be a good talking point to start off here with you because when I was listening to your show and then you do your weekly Monday segments about advices for the week and whatnot. So there was something that was I was trying to figure out what I could, like I said before, start off here with you. But then it was actually something that I came across sort of, I'm gonna say by chance, where I'm not gonna say the name of the show, but it was a show that was somewhat similar to what you do. And I remember when I was watching one episode, and then you listen to one and it leads into another one. They kind of like a rabbit hole of different shows, very similar, sort of that sort, very
Yeah.
similar. I'm going to say. And then I remember at one point after listening, I think to another episode, like 3 episodes in or something like that, I was telling myself this is the same thing over and over and over again that I was
Yeah.
listening to 3 episodes before, or whatever it was I was listening at that time. And then when I was listening to you, and understand when I'm saying this here, I'm not implying that that's the case here with you, but I'm curious about your perspective on something with you because when when I was listening to your show, I think there was actually for the episode that was uploaded last week, something crossed my mind where I remember when I was listening to the previous episodes I was referring to here, that it dawned on me to ask for someone in your position of what you do here, where is since you have a weekly segment about giving advices about hey how to deal with certain mental hurdles you're going through, physical, whatever the case may be. Then you
Mhm.
have a guest on your show, and the story that they're sharing with you about the struggles that they've gone through, the successes that they've been able to achieve, and then maintain that consistency. This without its hardships, of course, but be able to overcome those said hurdles. And then I was listening when I was listening to you talk about the various things you've come across with your guests about what you've learned about them prior to having them on the show and the events that occur after the fact, or whatever the case may be. What dawned on me was that I was because when I was listening to another show that was very similar to your show and hearing the same things over and over and over again, I don't know if you've ever come to a point where you realize that, you know, I've heard this story before last week. I've heard this story before 3 weeks ago. And I don't know if maybe you don't go through that at all, but I'm curious if you ever have felt it. But maybe if you don't feel that, but you probably felt something to the effect of, I I still find this exciting, and I find the new stories that I'm coming across are although similar, but there's always a interesting angle that I find appealing that I think is good for me to have these guests on my show. Therefore, having to share their experiences because there's a variation to their story that could be interesting for someone else to listen to this and come across something that could help them through these various struggles that they're going through themselves. But if you
Yeah.
don't feel that, I wonder if you feel something to the effect of, I've heard the story before last week, and I have another guest that's going to come on this week that has more or less the exact same story. What could I do to make it interesting for myself and whoever else is going to listen to that here? So I hope you don't mind the long gated question, but
Mhm.
I hope you understand why I want to start off here with you on that because I'm want to know if someone in your position had comes across that and how you deal with it if you do come across that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's a really great observation because when you have a specific audience in mind and
Right.
you have the similar talking points, it's much like self-development books. How many can you read before
Mhm.
you're getting the same thing over and over again?
Right.
And for me, a lot of the challenge early on was guest selection.
Right.
And you'd have multiple guests where and it came to a point where I would have a phenomenal guest, Rob. Like I would be like, hey, this person would be great. However, they work in finances. I just interviewed somebody in finances. Their story is very similar to the other person in finance, and I couldn't find the deviation. And I would be transparent and let them know that, hey, I'm looking for a little bit more variety. I know your area of expertise, your personal experiences will be heavily discussing financial literacy and responsibility. That was last week's show. Maybe come check back with me another time. So being selective in the guests that I pick has at least helped me spread out some of those topics that might overlap. The other thing I noticed was there are a lot of people who have similar stories who have different approaches in how they've gotten out of the mud. I've had multiple guys who have been homeless on the podcast before. I've met multiple guys who have been suicidal on the podcast before. When I ask the question is, of what was the turnaround? What was the trajectory? Some people say it was an aha moment. Some people say it was a gradual build.
Right.
Some people say they vividly remember childhood trauma. Other people say they had things great and they just went in the wrong direction and indulged too much. What I've learned is sometimes we can have a similar story, but 1,000 different ways to tell it.
Right.
And what I try and find is those nuanced differences, because a millionaire business owner, I've had those back to back, but one is more focused on family. The other one's more focused on discipline. And I do think there's value in all of that. And as we each kind of identify what's important, and one thing I actually do with my guests, and I'm interested as I've had bigger and bigger guests with bigger and bigger following, how awkward it must be for them to introduce themselves. But after I introduce the guest, I tell them, hey, introduce yourself to the people. And the reason I do that, I tell them, I say, listen, I want to see how you describe yourself, because I can identify what's important to you. Where I could say, okay, we have CEO, business owner, marketer, such and such. He'll be like, well, I'm a dad. I'm a husband. Right away, I'm like, okay, you're more of a family man than you are a businessman. Let's talk family. And let's talk how that family aspect helps you advance in your business. Because I'm hoping that somebody listening is probably crushing it in business, but they can maybe use a little bit more value in their home life. So I've identified that as men, and through all the stories that we have, there's a lot of different compartments in our life, whether it's finances, whether it's business, whether it's relationships, whether it's our career, community, spirituality, fitness, all those compartments. I try and address them differently and see, if I have a guest, what are they operating best in, and what can they help our guest with? Because I ideally, I look for operating at a 7 to 8 in all of those categories. If I want to be wide open at a 10 in business, something's going to suffer and be at 5. And that's kind of where I try and find balance in my episodes, in my storytelling, in the guests that I acquire, and really in the topics that we talk about.
Have you ever had, you don't have to give me names here, but I'm just curious if you ever had anybody in your show that, you thought had a really good story, and then once you've had them on the show, or maybe during in the middle of the conversation, you realize that either it's not as interesting as you thought it was going to be, or maybe it's a situation where you realize that something's not adding up, where I had this perception about them, and then having them on the show, given their story, that something's not equaling out to what I anticipated. Therefore, I probably should have done a little bit more digging before I brought them on there to verify what else is going on, because I made the assumption that they had this, so therefore they're set on having their story prepared to go about whatever they are going to get into here. So curious if you have anything like that I've come across.
So actually, prior to The Modern Man, I had a podcast called No Rain, No Rainbows. And that I did have a guest on the show who, after airing the show, some people actually commented on it and were like, did you do research on this person? And during the episode, I realized there was some embellishing, and I realized there was just something off, to your point. And after doing some research, I was like, oh man, like, okay, this person wasn't who I thought they were. And during the episode, I remember kind of having some skeptical questions, and they were kind of political answers that he dodged around. And I've actually since taken that episode down after doing my research and finding out, this person, had a reputation of misleading people, not being great to people, lived in multiple areas. And what I first saw as, oh, wow, look at all these places this person lived. They've been so transient. This is amazing. It probably was more like, okay, you can only stay in one place so long before people start to pick up on what you're doing, and then you have to pick up shop, right? So you weren't moving by choice, you were moving by necessity to keep your persona and your facade growing. So I had since taken that episode down, and that was on my previous podcast. When it comes to the Modern Man podcast, I could say I've been lucky enough where I haven't had any guest on that I've felt off about. I've had guests that have surprised me in terms of what I might have expected or what I might have thought, right? And I try to have no expectations with the guest and just be as curious as possible and learn about their story along the way. But I've also found myself pleasantly surprised where I've had a guest on who his episode hasn't come out yet, but he was a high level business coach. And we, in the pre interview, talked about being authentic. And he mentioned, he's like, I've never shared this on a podcast before. And he talked really much about his personal life. And he wasn't, and obviously it's going to be on the episode, so I'm not saying anything he doesn't want me to say, but so he's gay, but in his business, it's not front and center. And he's like, I'm not in the closet. It's just not front and center in my business. I don't hide it, and all that. But that's something I had no clue because he has a very masculine brand. The clients that he coached, they're all very masculine. They're aware that he's gay as well, but he was just very authentic and transparent. And we just had a great conversation in how we show up in the world, being our true selves. And that was more of a pleasant surprise. And I tend to have those pleasant surprises on the podcast of somebody who would get into a moment. They say, I don't know if I've really ever shared this, or I don't know if I've ever said it like that before. And that's helped me get into certain arenas and learn how to just sit there. Like some of the most valuable questions I've ever asked have been, tell me more, or why, right? Those short questions kind of open up a window for the guests who, I make them feel as comfortable as possible, who can go a little deeper where they've probably just been surface level for so long. And that's where, honestly, I think I find some of the magic of, what's really hidden deep inside some of these men.
Do you ever feel like, because you're essentially creating a brand for the show. I don't know if you can hear my dog whining here, but you create a brand for your show, and there is I'm not gonna say it's an image, but because when I met you, obviously you're very authentic. But what I'm trying to imply here is that if you're ever having a bad day, and you are going to record an advice, for the week, and then you're just not in a good mood, but you don't want to come off as being in a bad mood for the video, but therefore you are having to, I'm not gonna say put on an act, but you have to find something to motivate yourself to be in that right mindset to be able to do the video. Or better yet, you have to talk to a guest that same day and you're just in the shittiest mood. Maybe you don't want to do it that moment, but you've already booked them. You have to do it, and you have to go through with it. And then while you're doing the show, I'm sure some things get better along the way, as far as the whatever was stressing out that day. This is a relief for you. It's like a reprieve in a lot of ways. But once you get out of that, you're right back into the full where you have to deal with it again, and you're right back into that shitty mood. Yeah. So because you've created more or less this brand here, I don't know if there is a perception about how you want to go about in showing people who you are as a person. Again, I'm not implying that you're putting on a face. That's not what I'm implying here. But when you when you go on camera and you're doing your weekly videos for the advices and you're recording your episodes here, I'm not sure if you're very mindful about what the approach is, or I'm in a good mood, I'm going to do it today. But if I'm in a bad mood, I'm not going to do it today. But if I have to do it, I'm going to use some sort of inspiration to help me in that and get into the right mindset, so I don't have to show off the shitty that I've been dealing with prior to the recording here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's actually a combination of all those things.
Okay.
Right. So like my Monday modern moments, those little motivational tip videos that I do, I usually batch them. And usually it's a Sunday. My wife is at work. I'm home by myself. And that's when I get some correspondence done. But I also will sit down and I could record 4 or 5 in one sitting. And if I'm on a good Sunday, it's a good Sunday, the vibes are right, I'm feeling good. I do time blocking a lot. I'm a huge fan of time blocking. And that's what also helps kind of dictate my energy in certain areas. So Sunday, I wake up, my wife usually goes to work, I'll attend church, and then I'll have an hour of TED time. And that's where I get to be sometimes it's a little bit more like an hour and a half or so. TED time is where I literally
trademark that. That'd be funny.
But it's funny because I'm a gamer. I love Call of Duty Warzone. So that's what I play on Sundays. I'll put the headset on, try and get myself a win, and I'll do that for a little bit. And after gaming for an hour to an hour and a half, I'm kind of dialed back in. I kind of had a leisure time, and I'll drink some water, and that's usually when I'll sit down and I'll record maybe 3 or 4 of those Monday Modern moments. And that helps put me in the headspace, and I chunk it out for the month. So maybe if the next Sunday I don't feel good, okay, I ease up. If the next Sunday I feel good, and even though I have a bunch recorded, like, let me take this opportunity, right? Let me use the good days, much like finances, right? When it's good, save for when it's bad. I use the same thing with my energy. So that's how I batch some of that content. But to your point, let's say it's a Tuesday and I have a locked in scheduled interview with somebody, and it's been a less than ideal day.
Right.
I do breath work. Right next to my desk, I have one of the little Zen bowls. I have a chair that I sit down. I'll do Huberman's sympathetic sigh, which is an inhale through the nostril, like a slow, quick inhale out through the mouth. And I'll do that repeated for about 5 to 6 minutes. So it's like so I'll do that for about 5 to 6 minutes, and that slows my heart rate down. That kind of reduces my stress levels and helps me kind of recenter myself and kind of readdress things. And it kind of puts the world in perspective for me a little bit. I do cold showers, I do ice plunges, and I'll tell you what, if you're stressed in life, nothing brings reality of what's actually dangerous and not to the forefront than getting in a tub of ice water. Like that'll wake you up real quick. So those are some things that I've helped to realign myself. And I'll be honest, the reason I love podcasting so much, like conversations like this, these are things I look forward to. My wife will tell you I love to talk. So when I get to sit down, and most of the time it's a guest that I'm looking forward to talking to, someone that we're going to learn from each other. We're going to have a good, authentic conversation. And even on the podcast that came out last week that you were mentioning, the gentleman talking about the challenges of parenting or whatnot, he even says, he's like, man, I was excited for this conversation because I knew me and you would get to talk about some real stuff. And I'm like, the podcast is kind of an escape for me. And it's kind of an outlet for me as well, for therapeutic conversations on what us as men go through, how we can show up as our best selves. And I usually, even if I'm in a bad mood going in, and that has happened many times, I can honestly look back and say, I don't ever remember coming out of podcasting in a worse mood than I went in. I'm usually motivated. I'm usually in a better mood. I usually learned something. And even the episodes that I thought, like, I don't know how good this is going to be halfway through, has still punched me in the face with something good and valuable. So that's been helpful. And I also think, as you mentioned, to the brand, I articulate with my guest each time. I said, hey, I do the whole pre-interview. The podcast is about this. This is who our audience is. This is the vision of the podcast and what I'm trying to accomplish with it. That's the intention of our conversation today. And I kind of realign that every time with my guest and with myself. So I'm going in knowing I'm talking to men ages 18 to 44 who are trying to figure it out in life. They are working a job, working a career, but they know wherever they are, they're capable of more. And they're looking for that next step, which is why they're listening to something like my podcast in the first place. Just saying that right now kind of gets me fired up, because now I have a vivid image of who I'm talking to, and it puts me instantly in a mind of service. So, Rob, if you're having a bad day and all of a sudden, somebody needs you, right? You're probably going to be willing to help as much as you can. And that's what kind of helps me stick to the brand and identify what the audience will need when I hit record.
So you mentioned before about more or less the age demographic that you are. It sounds like to me you have. I'm not sure if this was intentional in the very beginning, but was that the mindset you had that because I'm going to talk about these various things that deals with, masculinity, overcoming the various hurdles that men go through, because it seems like it's just a specific audience you're looking out here for. And you mentioned 18 to 44. Was that the initial mindset that I want to appeal to an audience of this age range here? Because I know that these are the guys that are in between that period where they're still trying to figure things out. And I think that there's some that I have here that I could use to showcase what is out there for them to use the tools available at their disposal to figure out what they can do to better themselves. Or was it one of those organic processes that once you started going through that here, then you figured out, okay, this is what I want to accomplish here, and this is who I want to reach out to in these specific areas here?
Yeah. I would say it was more of a progress. It was a little bit of both, where
Okay.
my previous podcast was No Rain, No Rainbows, and I was just talking to everybody about self-growth and mental health and stuff. And then with Modern Man, it was very niche towards men in general, right?
Right.
I'm just talking to the guys. And then as I'm talking about the things we go through, I found, there's a number of transitionary periods from, 18 into the 20s. You think you know it all, but you quite don't. Like,
Right.
if you talk to 22-year-old Ted, I thought I was the man. I thought I had it figured out. I'm gonna crush it. You talk to 32-year-old Ted, I'm telling you, I have no idea what's going on. I'm just trying to figure it out. I've been humbled in life, right? And then as I've talked to older gentlemen in their 40s, they have a new sense of confidence in their life. And I recognize that there's a number of transitions we go through in that age group, not just men, everybody. I'm sure it's a development through life. But as I'm talking these topics and I'm having these guests and we're unpacking more and more, I pay attention to my analytics and I see, okay, YouTube, 85 to 90% viewers are men. Great. The message is landing with the people that we want to talk to.
Right.
Then I see the age group really jumbled up in between that 18 to 44 range. So it started as just talking to men. The issues that came into play just naturally fell into those age ranges. And then the audience, as I'm paying attention to the analytics, falls in that age ranges as well. And I had one guest on a while back, and he said something that was really, really interesting. He was he rode crew for Harvard, and he mentioned the four periods of the race that's very similar to a lot of guys. And when they talk about the midlife crisis, he says the beginning of the race, you start rowing and you get your pace up, you get your momentum going, right? In the second leg of the race, you have a good pace, you're maintaining, and you're just keeping that energy going, you're keeping that pace up. Now he jumped to the last leg of the race, the fourth leg of the race. You see the finish line, and at that point, it's all heart. It's an all-out sprint. You see the end, and you're just
Right.
going all the way to it. But he said that third leg, that third quarter is where you are made or you're broken, because
Right.
that is where the lactic acid has built up in your body. You want to quit. You're tired, but you have this pace you're trying to maintain. You're too far to see the end. You're far, the beginning is an afterthought, and you're just in the thick of it in that third leg. And he said for a lot of men, when they get into their 30s and that middle age, heading into the 40s, that's their third leg, right? It's
Mm.
the third leg of the race where they're in the thick of it, starting a family, supporting for a family, the the stresses and maybe the setbacks of kids, children, schooling, houses having maintenance issues, cars needing maintenance, whatever might happen. It's the summer when we're recording this, and it's 90 degrees out today. I have friends here, their air conditioning's broken and they have to take their kids to a hotel, and you deal with all these financial setbacks. You're in the thick of the race, right?
Right.
And you're too far from the end to think about the kids going to college, and you're too far from the beginning to remember that fresh energy you had when you started. And that's how we kind of landed a little bit on this is the pocket that resonates. This is the pocket that men are listening and need what we're talking about.
What's your perspective on, because when you're explaining this here, there's something that crossed my mind about um so I've come across with a lot of people that have a sense of entitlement. They have this perception about how, because I am this, therefore you have to respect me. If you're because I'm your elder, you have to respect me. And I'm not 100% on board with that, because I met a lot of kids who are much more respectful than a lot of adults who are well into their 80s, and it's also flipped around too. I met a lot of kids who are very disrespectful, a lot of adults who are very respectful. So it's a variation of people that I've come across, but a lot of times I've noticed that the issues that you've talked about here is across the board with everybody when it comes to both men and women and people who are in different stages of their lives. And sometimes I've noticed that I see a lot more people who have not changed than those who
Mm.
have changed when it comes to their experiences, about what they accept when it comes to um what I used to do 10 years ago is not going to work for me now anymore. And there are some people, despite, knowing that those set of values or those set of habits, if you will, doesn't do anything for them anymore, but yet somehow they're still hung up on them and they refuse to let go for one reason or another. Either they're afraid or they just don't know any better, for whatever the reasons may be. But there are some people out there who have a certain view of life that they refuse to let go of those set of values they've held on to for so many years. And despite the fact you may present something to them like, hey, well, I used to look at things that way too, but it doesn't work for me anymore. And I can clearly see that it's not working for you either. But for some reason, you're refusing to let go of that. Why bother? And if they are resistant towards that, I'm not saying you would come across it often, but I'm wondering if you, because you are in a position where you want to help people out, if you've ever come to a point where somebody is just flat out refusing it, is it one of those situations for yourself where I intend on wanting to help the person out, or is it a situation where if they don't want the help, then they don't want to hear it, then they're on their own at that point because there's nothing I can do at that point to help them out, despite what your intentions are for this platform that you're using here?
Yeah. I use the analogy between a tugboat and a lighthouse,
Mm,
right? A tugboat would be kind of that person who just doesn't want to change, right? We probably all have an image of this person in our heads who, man, they keep making the same mistakes. Why does Tommy keep getting in bad toxic relationships, right? Oh, she's so hot, but it's a bad toxic relationship,
right.
Tommy. Um, a tugboat would be going out of your way to try and fix this person. But tugboats break down a lot. They don't have long lifespans because they exert so much energy trying to pull on an extra load. Whereas opposed to a lighthouse helps guide and assist those who are looking for guidance. Lighthouses, those things stand for years, decades, and generations.
Mm-hmm.
And they're even preserved across the country because of the service and the guidance that they provide. And what I mean by that is if someone doesn't want to change, they're not going to. No matter how much information you give them, no matter how many tools you give them, if they don't want to change, they're simply not going to. And we will exert our energy, our resources, and our time trying to get them to change at our own detriment.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sound dismissive of those people who are not interested in changing, but quite frankly, my message is not for them because it's falling on deaf ears. They're more than welcome to listen to the podcast. They're more than welcome to join the Noble Knights and be part of our group. However, if you're not receptive to the information, it's not going to have any change in your life. So even the nature of how the content comes out, it's on social media, and I'm thankful for everyone that follows me. The podcast is out on all podcasting platforms, but in order to listen to it, there's an intentionality. I did not hack your phone, Rob, and put my podcast on your phone.
Right.
It's something that has to come out and be seeked.
Right.
So I'm speaking to the people who are seeking my message. And for those that it doesn't resonate with, hey, no harm, no foul. I don't take any offense. You can unsubscribe and keep on moving. However, those people that do find a message, those are my people. And that's the tribe. And the idea is as that tribe grows, going back to Tommy, you're friends with Tommy and he sees like, man, you have a good, happy relationship. Man, like you seem very comfortable in your day in and day out. Suddenly Tommy's going to look in the mirror and be like, okay, I would prefer a life that looks more like that. How do I emulate what he does? So even my wife has pointed out where she's like, Ted, a lot of your friends tend to pick up some of the traits that you do, right? I have a couple of friends and coworkers that I work out with. We were working together for maybe 6 months or so. Next thing I know, they come to my apartment every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 4 days a week, and we work out together because one of my values is fitness and working out. Now I have a workout crew. Those are my friends. My wife also identifies, she's like, if someone doesn't have anything going on, you don't really have a strong friendship with them. All because, I'm always on the move. I'm building things. I'm talking about visions. I'm building myself into who I'm going to be. You mentioned someone being the same. The biggest compliment I can get is someone's like, man, you changed. Rob, if we did this episode a year from now and I'm saying the same thing, I messed up for the last year.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to change, or a better word to say is I'm supposed to evolve.
Right.
There are some things that I believed at 22 that I don't believe anymore here at 35. And I'm sure when I turn 44, I'm probably going to look back at 35-year-old Ted and be like, yeah, you still needed some tweaking and some adjusting.
Right.
I'm humble enough to know that I have things to learn, but I'm also confident enough in my foundation with what I believe and where I'm going. And I think that balance is really important because sure, nobody knows it all, but there is going to be some importance in structure, character, values, and a baseline and how we show up and how we operate. There is value in consistency, right?
Right.
My wife, for example, she would love the consistency of my loyalty. That's something I promised in our marriage, and that's something that she could expect throughout our marriage. Now, when we talked about expectations with each other before getting married, one thing I said to my wife, I said, just take me with you. She's like, what do you mean by that? I said, we're getting married in our early 30s. We intend to be with each other for the rest of our lives. We are going to change through the years. You're going to be a different person in 5, 10, 20 years. Just take me with you on that journey. Articulate with me where you're going, and I will do the same. Because I do think we're supposed to change. We're supposed to evolve over time. And for the people who stay the same, they're going to keep getting the same results. And again, not trying to be dismissive of them. This train is leaving the station. They're either on it or they're not. If my
Right.
message is for you, come on. If not, by all means, I hope you find the train you're looking for.
So this is a two-part question here. Do you think you have a bad temper? And my second part of the question is that how you definitely deal with the adversity that I'm sure that you've dealt with early on in life and to where you are with it now. You talked about you've changed, but I'm wondering how much of the change you've noticed about yourself when it comes to dealing with the adversities you're dealt with here, and if your temper, if you have one, is a major factor that you had to learn how to mitigate or control it, whatever you have to do to deal with that here. Because one thing for myself that I've noticed before is that I used to get angry about the dumbest things, and it was just because I just didn't know any better than how to handle it. Not to have that's not an excuse for what I'm about to say here, but in the environment that I was growing up here, losing your temper was quite common, and for the weirdest things sometimes. Something when I think about it now, when I think about the things I used to lose my temper with, it was irrelevant. But at that moment, it meant it was something that I thought was very important. And then, of course, as time has gone by, I realized that doesn't. I don't hold on to those sentiments anymore. But I do notice I still do have a temper, but my temper is directed towards something that I think is much more valuable when it comes to expressing why I am angry for something that is worth bringing up to whatever the person is saying, whatever the case may be. But I'm curious about yourself though, because again, you have a brand out there that's about positivity. But I'm curious about if you have those moments where you're just about to lose it and how you learn to deal with that. And if that's something you don't want people to see, and if they do see it, how would you go about and conducting yourself under those circumstances?
Yeah, absolutely. Ownership and facing it. I would have told you I don't have an anger problem, and then about a year and a half ago, February 2022, I punched the steering wheel and broke my hand. You know, um, yeah, that happened. Um, so I learned that's not a way to express my anger,
Right.
and the surgery thankfully wasn't too expensive, and my hand is good. um, but I think it's how we process things,
Right.
and how I used to process things, and my wife identified that I can get defensive when my environment is disrupted, and I'm a very
So
type
are you
A
a control
personality.
freak then?
It's not necessarily a control freak because I'm also a very tolerable person. Like
Okay.
I'm very willy-nilly. I go with the flow and everything, but I'm very regimented. And I'm a creature of habit. Like I could tell you for a fact at night, my bedtime routine is brush my teeth. I put my teeth whitening on. I fill out my journal. I read my non-fictional book, and then I go to bed with my clothes already laid out the night before. I'm up at 2:20 on the dot. I don't hit snooze. I get in there, I brush my teeth, put on my clothes. I'm out the door in less than 15 minutes with my jug of water, my backpack, and I'm regimented and everything's scripted. But while that helps, I even practice time blocking. While that helps, it's also a maybe a defense mechanism in just setting autonomy in my life so I know how to operate and move. And where my frustration comes in is, man, like, I the guys I work out with, hey, we work out at 12:30. I have from 12:30 to 1:30. And someone, oh, I'm a little late and everything. That would frustrate me, right? Because it's like, listen, and I do it to myself. I run a tight schedule here. 2 p.m. I have a podcast recording. So you're late. We start the workout at 1:40 at 12:45 instead of 12:30. We go till 1:45. Now I got to run home, barely have time to drink my shake before I sit down and do the interview. It throws my whole day off, right?
Okay.
So I guess that's what I mean by when my environment gets disrupted, my process gets disrupted, and that would frustrate me and kind of throw me off. What I had to identify was the way that gets processed, right? The trigger that had me punch a steering wheel was just dumb. It was traffic, right? I mean, it was a heavy week. Yeah, but it was a straw that broke the camel's back. It was a heavy week. I think we just had back-to-back snowstorms, so I was working all weekends. Good friend of mine, his mother passed. So after a full day of work, we were down for the funeral. After the funeral, we had the reception, and then at the end of the day, after it's 10 p.m., I've been up since 2 a.m. that day, driving back from a funeral. It's raining. I know it's about to snow for the third week in a row in Charlotte, which never happens. And I get caught in traffic, stuck behind a truck, and it starts chaining over the snow. And I'm just like, mother, punch the steering wheel, right? And it was just a culmination of all these things I never dealt with, right? The steering wheel wasn't what made me mad. It was not having TED time, not having the ability to just breathe, relax, and enjoy myself, have an outlet. I haven't worked out for a little while, so there's pent up aggression there as well. Maybe me and my lady didn't have sex for a week or something, so there's pent up sexual energy there. I hope you don't mind. I'm transparent and 100.
That's fine. I just think it's funny you said that.
But these are the things that I also we talk about real talk with guys, right? These are the things that all play into how we process things. So I've learned, breath work is one of the ways I process things. I've also added buffers in my schedule where, because I've scheduled things out, where my podcast is scheduled so far out, I've given up on how I show up, right? Like if I had to cancel a podcast, I would be so frustrated with myself, Rob.
Yeah.
I'd be like, I made a commitment to this person. I'm supposed to show up. I don't want to cancel on this person. No, I can't do it. And I would, come hell or high water, make it work. But then I had to reassess my values. And a few weeks ago, my wife was sick. I'm at work. I said, hey, do you need me to cancel the workout? Do you need me to cancel and reschedule the podcast? Because the output is not affected by me having to clear out my day, right? And I'm learning to be more malleable in the process. And I've learned to slow down in life, build gaps in my structure to deal with the certain setbacks that are going to happen, so I don't punch a steering wheel again for traffic.
What's the one thing for you that you've noticed the biggest difference in yourself when it comes to you starting, this journey that you're on here? And what I mean by the question, I guess I'm trying to be more specific about what I'm referring to here, is that, because to me, it seems as if, though, because you had the intention of what you could do to more or less better the world, if you will, and helping other people out. But I'm wondering if along the way, when you had started this path that you're on here, if you had ever learned something about yourself where maybe you've come to realize that, I hope this doesn't come up the wrong when I ask this question, but the person that I'm presenting myself to be, I don't think is the person that I really am, if that makes any sense. Do you understand what I'm referring to by here?
100%.
So I'm starting with that. I want to ask that question because there's a perception that I have, I guess, with certain people, because I'm kind of skeptical at times when it comes to what someone's intentions are, and I'm not talking about you specifically, but I'm skeptical about how people present themselves to be, and sometimes if it's too good to be true, it probably is. It's probably not entirely true in my opinion. That's not to say though that it's not possible for someone to always be in a happy-go-lucky mood. I'm not saying those people don't exist. I've met people that are, and I've seen how they are under the worst circumstances, and they still maintain a positive attitude about certain things. But I'm still left to question about how someone is still be able to maintain that, because the reason I'm bringing this up is because I remember hearing a particular story about a person who had come across as very upbeat, very outgoing, and even when they were dealt with a lot of personal hurdles, they seemed to become very positive despite the uh, the struggles that they were going through. And a lot of people had said that this person was very good. They were always very patient. They were very helpful. They were listening to other people, and but what they never noticed was that the inner demons, if you will, that they were dealing with, that eventually led to their suicide.
Mm.
And but the persona they kept giving off was that they were always in a good mood despite the hurdles they were dealing with, or that I guess none of the people were fully aware of here. When I heard that story, this is like over 10 years ago when I heard the story, I always remembered that image in my head where the person came off really, really happy, but deep down inside they were struggling, and to the point where they killed themselves.
Yeah.
And I remember when I heard about that, it led me to question about other people that I've come across that were very similar to that approach as well too, or even when it comes to when you see TV personalities as well, where they're talking about maintain a positive attitude, then you kind of have the real story that they were full of it, that they had bad intentions, or whatever the case may be. So it starts to become really distorted. So that's where my skepticism stems from when it comes to that. And again, I'm not implying that with you at all, but my question to you is that when you started to do this here, if you had a perception about yourself, and whatever perception you had about yourself, once you started going through the motion, if you realize that the person that I believed that I was, I'm not
Mm.
that person because of what I've experienced here through these conversations and going through the highs and lows with this field and my job and my personal life. I'm starting to realize that I'm not who I say I am, and therefore I have to reevaluate myself and organize what my intentions are going to be. Because if I'm doing this won't sustain it so much longer, to the point where I will have breakdown, and I got to figure out what's the best way to approach it so that I don't have more or less those breakdowns by the time I go up in front of the camera and people start picking up that yesterday you were great on the show, but at the store you're full of shit. What happened there? So
Mhm.
I'm curious about your perspective on how you look at yourself under those circumstances from the beginning to where you are with it now.
Yeah. I think, man, I'd start with we're all flawed. I mean, we're all human,
Right.
right? And the hardest thing about social media is a lot of times they're highlight reels.
Right.
And I'd be honest, where when I first started, I I had false confidence. And this actually came from a while ago on my social media. This was before I got hacked. So the social media you
Yeah.
see now was different than my previous one, because my
Okay.
previous one got hacked. I had like 9,000 followers. I was on my way to 10,000 in 2019. It got hacked and I started completely over. And I've managed to get it back up to about 5,000, 6,000 now. Um, but that was a good reset for me because there was a bit of a false confidence. And what I mean by the false confidence was I was putting out a lot of those words and the quotes and the things that we see, because I knew that's what hit and that's what played. But there was this imposter syndrome that kept like rumbling underneath. What I realized wasn't so much of the persona that I was putting out, it was more of my insecurities. And if
Mm.
I'm being transparent and honest, to this day, one of the biggest things I've worked on was getting back into my consistency with social. Um, Even Nate Palmer, Million
Mm.
Dollar Body, he
Yeah.
called
Yeah.
me out once. He's like, Ted, post more because you're talented, you're authentic, and you do good work. And I've been having more people in my life tell me to post more, because from my old account where I saw a lot of that false confidence, I think the difference between that Ted and the Ted now is I've done a lot of work behind the scenes. I've been doing a lot of self work, and every day I fill out power questions or like a daily journal of, what am I grateful for? What's something special what are three things I experienced that were special lately? Who do I appreciate? And what have I accomplished recently? How am I going to make my wife feel loved? And what are the three things I want to accomplish today? And then at the end of the day, I journal how my day was. And what I'm kind of rewiring for myself, and what I'm really starting to look into for the inspiration for my content, is how do I show up in life? So case in point, a couple weeks ago, as you know, I'm trying to acquire more coaching clients, trying to grow my coaching business. I had a coaching call lined up. I had another discovery call lined up. The first one completely no-showed. The second one canceled on me last minute. And what was supposed to be a very productive, great day was one canceled. The other one, the other one didn't show, and my website went down that day. So my website's down. My two calls didn't show up. I'm not getting anything done. And the old Ted, back the punch the steering wheel Ted, would have been pissed off, upset, complaining, and everything. And what I did was I hired somebody to work on my website. I knew that was going to cost me some money, but it's okay.
Right.
I caught up on some emails, and I'm like, you know what? I've been waiting to get to this. And then I went out on my balcony. I did an Instagram story, and it was a 2-part story of me talking about, man, your boy. I literally just sat down. I was like, I'm not gonna lie, your boy took some L's today, y'all. Your boy took some L's today. I took some losses. I took some hits. I literally just talked to the camera on my Instagram story, like, my website went down. This happened, but it's okay because I still got work done. I'm going to take those losses, turn them into lessons, and we're going to keep this train going. Mm. And I had 4 DMs on my story on like, bro, I needed this. Thanks for sharing. Keep it up, man. This was awesome. And that's resonating with people, right? And that's what I realized was, now the source for my content is just my day to day. There's days where I'm feeling motivated and I feel like I am crushing it. And I'll share those quotes. I'll share the motivation. I'll share the picture of me in the gym doing the pull-ups and everything, because I'm feeling strong nowadays, right? I've been on this workout regimen for over a year, and I'm in the lowest body fat I've been in my 30s. I'm pushing the most weight that I've ever pushed. I'm feeling strong, so I'm expressing strength on my Instagram right now. So that's been helpful, but it's actually an authentic expression instead of, before I wasn't as strong as I was now, and I was expressing the fitness side of everything when I knew I was skipping workouts. I knew I was still eating fast food all the time. So I think the best thing was a reset for me, which allowed me to have a new foundation and then allow my experiences to be the inspiration for my social. Whereas I think you saw the deadlifting video I put up. That was an accident. I was about to deadlift. The phone was in my pocket, and I just took it out and threw it to my buddy. He's like, "You want me to take a video?" I was like, "No, I just don't want it in my pocket." He's like, "All right, I'll take a video anyway." And it was a quick 20-30-second thing. And I'm scrolling through Instagram. I heard this inspirational quote that was a few seconds. It matched the video. I was like, "Oh, post it." Right?
Yeah.
Natural, authentic. So I'm kind of letting that drive my content, but I'm not going to be kind of fake and say every day is a great day. I'm not going to, put out the message that, I'm always happy-go-lucky. I have ups and downs like everybody, but what it does excite me is just the opportunity. And I am described by others like, "Ted, you're the most positive person I know." Great. I try to be positive. That is, who I am on and off camera, on the podcast, off the podcast, in my marriage, in my friendships, in my relationships. I'm always the life of the party. I try and be happy. And so much so that I admit whenever I'm in a bad mood, even my wife will tell you, I apologize for being in a bad mood. I let myself sit there though. I let myself feel it. I absorb it. I sit in a bad mood. I give myself 2-3 days to be in a funk. And that's about it.
I've asked this question before more recently because again, I've been questioning a lot of things. Not to say that I don't believe people. It's not that. It's just I question people's motivations because I'm curious about where their mindset is at when it comes to what they're what their intentions are, why they do what they do, and what their beliefs are based upon, what they're wanting to pursue.
Mhm.
And one of the things, there's two questions I ask that I ask sporadically, but I always find the right opportunity to ask, because sometimes I don't think it's always a question to always ask at at every episode. But for in this case here for you, I'm really curious about two things here for you, and you can answer in anywhere you want. But I'm curious about, because you talked about taking those L's where the website went down, and one client didn't show up and the other one had to cancel, whatever else. And I was looking at your face when you said that, and I thought how hard that must have been at that moment for you to have these expectations, and just like that, it was taken away from you.
Mhm.
But then at the same time, I was also curious about what would happen if you were at a point where none of this is working for you anymore. Where, let's say, for example, people have stopped showing interest into your work. That's including your podcast. Let's say your job, hey, right now things are drying up and we are not going to be able to keep you much longer. So this is your last day. And you're at a point where you really don't have anything else that you could rely on as let's say as a source of income, where you can feel comfortable that I can make this last for a while I'm going through this transition here. But right, like instantly like that's taken away from you. Now you literally have to start from scratch.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I also wonder if the thought about legacy is also important for you, because for me personally, it's not important to me. It really isn't a thing for me to consider, because I don't care too much about what people think. I care about what I do and who I have these conversations with. Because if I my intention is that when you walk away, I would like to for you to think that this was a nice guy. I like this person, and I would like to come back and revisit them again somewhere down the line. And that to me is the accomplishment at the end of the day. But for some people, legacy is an important factor, because for whatever those reasons may be. So I'm just really curious about how you think you would deal when it comes to if the opportunities were stripped from you. How do you think you would handle that? And then secondly, if it was taken away from you and then you're left with your legacy, about if you think legacy is important for you, knowing that you will never get that back, but thinking about what you've gone through, and if people will remember, Ted was a great guy. He was good at this, and this. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, but he left a good work print behind for us to look back and revisit here, because it was quality content, if that makes any sense. So I'm curious to hear about your perspective
Yeah.
on that.
100%. And I love that you asked that, because it actually really resonates with me to my core. But with everything that I'm doing, it's a passion project. I'll call
Right.
it what it is. It's more of a passion project than a full on business, right? And how I show up in the world is probably first and foremost. And in the video form, if anyone's watching, there's two awards on my bookshelf here. This is an Emmy I won from my news business, and this is a plaque I won in the 8th grade for integrity and strength of character. And my dad will tell you to this day, he doesn't give two craps about this Emmy compared to that award I won in the 8th grade, because he always taught me, character and integrity, be who you say you are, do your best, show up, and just be a value add in the world, not a value subtraction. So that's where my focus is. When it comes to the work that I'm doing with Modern Man and the podcast and the business, um, when I first started it, it was because I wanted to help. I wanted to give, and I still do. But the reality is, this costs me. It
Mhm.
costs me time. It costs me money. It costs me energy. It, it it's a price I pay. It's a price my wife pays. As we're sitting down talking right now, my wife is in the other room. She's off today. I could be on the couch with my wife pouring into my marriage, but I choose to pour into this passion that I feel very well and very tight to my heart. So, because as I've leaned into this mission, I've understood it costs me, and I don't mind paying that cost. However, I'm also highly aware is there has to be a reciprocal through it. There has to be an energy exchange eventually on the financial aspect to justify the amount of money, time, and energy that I put in it.
Right.
Because I do think a lot of people try and do so much good in the world. And much as like we talked about beforehand with the tugboat and the lighthouse, I'm putting out all this content, all this advice, and all these things that can help people. Well, the transition into the coaching business is who's actually ready to pony up their money and invest in their growth. Because at the end of the day, I can do this out of the goodness of my heart. But to your point, if it doesn't have a reciprocal or a return, there's going to come to a point where I don't do it anymore. And it's not because I don't want to do it. It's I can't do it because when kids come into the picture, they're going to need me more than this does.
Right.
You know, and that's just for me understanding my values, my priorities, and where I'm at. Is this is very much important to me. And if everything were stripped away from me, my wife and I have spoken about it. If I can't afford my team on the back end anymore, if I can't afford to spend the time editing everything myself like I used to starting out, you know, what would I do? Partly why I started the Modern Moments was that it's the net. Get used to doing that, right? Get really good at chunking an hour and pumping 4 episodes out with that content. Okay, so if I can get to a point where everything is gone and taken from me, I could still spend an hour and I could still do this mission. It's not going to be as grand. It's not going to be as impactful. It's not going to be as big, as pretty. That's okay. I could still stick to this mission and stick to this heartstring that's so near and dear to my heart while paying attention to the things in my life that need me. But while I have the opportunity to, I'm giving everything I can in this mission. And I understand I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Am I doing this for money? The frank answer is yes. I'm not doing this for my health anymore. It started out as the goodness of my heart. But as life becomes reality, we have bills to pay. There are people that love us that would like to spend time with us. And if I'm asking for permission to step away from my wife and my family, just like when I host events and they want me out there in Greenville to spend my tank of gas and leave, take a day off and host an event, that's going to cost you money. Why? Because I'm going to have to come back and my wife is going to miss me for the night. But at the very least, if I can come back, get her some flowers, take her out on a date, that builds our relationship while also allowing me to facilitate whatever you need. And that's kind of the exchange in the focus that I'm on now. And I hope that answers your question because, you know, it's very much a reality that, you know, at some point clients fall off, finances stop coming in. That's the business. And that's just business.
All right. So on that note, I guess we can go ahead and close that. But I do want to say thank you again for taking the time to speak with me because I know you are pretty busy when it comes to your schedule here. So the fact you've given me the hour to indulge me with all these wonderful answers you've given me here, I appreciate that. But I'll also be sure to have everything in the link down below for people to check out here for you. But again, I do want to say thank you. And I would love to revisit these conversations and keep with you again to more or less pick up from where we last left off. So for the cameras, I want to say thank you. And until next time, cheers to you.